My father didn't know how to bribe, and in Russia, that made him practically helpless. He came to Moscow in the late 1960s from a small, depressed provincial town. He arrived full of hope to study at university and, of course, to build a new life in the capital. Yes, university was free, but in exchange, the government decided where you would live and work for 5 years after graduation. My father was a brilliant student, but he had no connections. So instead of staying in Moscow, he was assigned to a city he'd never even seen before, Gorky, now Nizhny Novgorod. At the time, he thought it was a disaster. As a top graduate, he had dreamed of working in a ministry, walking the polished hallways of power. And there was a way to make that happen. You just needed to find the right person and discreetly pass him a thick envelope with the appropriate sum inside. But my father didn't know how to give bribes. And even if he had, he didn't have the money. And because of that, he ended up in Gorky, where he met my mother. And that's the reason I exist today. In the Soviet Union, not knowing how to bribe was seen as not knowing how to navigate life. It shaped everything. Where you lived, how much you earned, what you wore, and where you could go on vacation. My name is Elvira Bary. I'm a writer, and today we are going to explore the real operating system behind Russian governance and the grease that keeps the entire machine running. Bribes. For most of its history, the Russian state was extremely poor. It simply didn't have the money to pay its officials a proper salary, so instead it told them, quite literally, feed yourselves. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a system called кормление, or feeding. From the early Middle Ages onward, the state would grant entire towns or profitable bureaucratic roles to trusted men. An official would ride into his assigned district and begin to harvest his rewards. He collected income in three main ways. First, a household tax in grain or livestock. Second, fees for every minor service, a permission to trade, issuing a travel permit, or resolving a legal issue. And third, most importantly, the endless flow of gifts. On holidays, on inspections, or whenever the official hinted he was unhappy. There were no fixed rates, no budget caps, and the only limit was how much the local population could endure before they finally snapped. Tenure could last 1 year or 20, depending on the whim of your superior. So each newcomer moved fast, stripping value before someone else replaced him. Corruption became normal, expected, and even respected, and over time, in the Russian mind, power and profit fused. You get your position, and once you had it, you squeeze it dry. Bribes weren't just part of domestic life, they were baked into foreign affairs too. For centuries, Russian principalities were subordinate to the Mongols, and the Mongol Khans had the final say over who ruled where. If you wanted power, you didn't go to the people. They decide nothing. You went to the Khan bearing mountains of gifts. If he liked your offerings, you got the job. But your rivals might show up with something better, say a coat of rare sable fur or purebred war horse. In that case, sorry, come back richer next year. The Muscovite rulers understood that bribery led to injustice, and injustice bred instability. Ivan the Terrible even introduced the death penalty for excessive bribery. But not for bribery itself. No one questioned the practice. What mattered was keeping it discreet and not causing trouble for those in power. There's a story about one of Ivan's officials receiving a goose as a gift. That alone wasn't the problem. Gifts were expected, but this goose was different. It had been stuffed with gold coins. The gesture was too blatant, too greedy. Ivan was furious. He ordered the official to be executed in the same manner a kitchen maid would dismember a goose. The message was clear. Steal modestly, quietly, and never embarrass the Tsar. Foreign merchants learned quickly. When England executed Charles I, the Russian Tsar banned English traders from doing business in Russian cities. But that wasn't just politics. That was people's livelihoods, shops, warehouses, workers, families who had lived in Moscow for decades. To fix the situation, they had to do what everyone did: pay off the right officials, who would then write a carefully worded petition to the Tsar, explaining that these merchants weren't involved in regicide, just trying to sell fur. By the 17th century, Russian bribe takers had formed distinct species. The small fish. These were the low-level bureaucrats, underpaid, overworked, and embedded in a system where refusing a bribe meant starving. They'd accepted anything: a few coins, a dozen eggs, even a guard dog puppy. The extortionists. These men had power and used it to crush people. Take Leonty Pleshev, a Moscow judge in the 17th century. His henchmen would investigate who in town had money. Then they'd write up fake charges: murder, theft, or treason, and to avoid trial, the victims were encouraged to pay generous donations. Finally, there was the opportunists. These men didn't even have to ask. Bribes flowed to them like water to a downhill stream because of their position. Ernst Johann Biron, the favorite of Empress Anna, received mountains of foreign money. Prussia paid him $200,000 to block a Russian-French alliance. Britain secured free trade rights for Russia to the east while the treasury bled, and Biron's fortune grew. Picture an official in 18th century Russia. He does not just serve the state. He serves the man who gave him the job. And total loyalty isn't abstract, it's survival. Without that post, he can't support his family. Some Russian nobles were rich enough to avoid service altogether, even though government policy technically required it. They'd enroll their sons into fake military or civil positions at birth. And by the time the boy reached marriage age, he'd already served long enough to retire with honors, without even doing a day of work. But this game required land, serfs, and wealth. To maintain that kind of lifestyle, you needed hundreds, even thousands of peasants. Most Russian nobles didn't have that. They owned a few souls and lived only slightly better than their human property. For them, there was no real alternative. The soil was poor, trade barely existed outside major cities. The only reliable path to stability was securing an official post, and the favors, protections, and bribes that came with it. How did you get such a post? You could buy it, or if you didn't have money, you needed someone else, a patron, a благодетель, a benefactor. Someone who would lift you up the ladder in exchange for loyalty, gifts, and complete allegiance. You were expected to repay that debt for life, take his side in every conflict, sing his praises, pass his messages. And if bribes came your way, you'd better share them, because your benefactor had someone to answer to as well. Bribes didn't stop at the bottom, they flowed upward, coin by coin, gift by gift, until they reached someone in St. Petersburg with access to the Tsar's ear. In return for loyalty, that man received budgets, charters, and protection from audits, and passed benefits down to his loyal clients. If he rose, everyone rose. If he fell, his entire network collapsed with him. It was a food chain, and Russians had a name for it: clan. Not a family by blood, but by tribute. Everyone feeding, and being fed. One man embodied this system better than anyone, Alexander Menshikov. Peter the Great's favorite, Menshikov started life as a son of a stable hand and rose to become the second most powerful man in the empire. How? He understood the rules. He built his own clan. Governors, tax officials, military quartermasters all owed their positions to him, and in return they paid him rent for the privilege. People said a third of the state's money disappeared into Menshikov's pocket before it even reached the treasury. But Peter tolerated it. Why? Because Menshikov delivered. He built fleets, supplied armies, and got results. In Russia, that was enough. The clan might be corrupt, but it worked. There's a joke that sums it up perfectly. What's the difference between a bad official and a good one? The bad one does nothing after he gets a bribe. The good one does everything he promised. In the early Soviet years, the official narrative claimed bribery had been eradicated along with capitalism. But the black market simply adapted. As private property was abolished and rationing became the norm, influence turned into a form of currency. Access to food, medicine, housing, or even protection from arrest often hinged on knowing someone inside the system. Under Stalin, the stakes rose dramatically. Bribes were no longer just a shortcut. They could be a lifeline in a system ruled by terror. During the Second World War, survival often depended on informal exchanges. The Russian card system was riddled with shortages, and those with connections to warehouse managers, quartermasters, or hospital staff had better odds of staying alive. On the front lines, officers were known to accept watches, cigarettes, or family heirlooms in exchange for safer assignments or medical leave. In the rear, a loaf of bread could cost a week's wages, or a favor from someone in a distribution office. The war didn't suspend corruption, it gave it new urgency. When the state couldn't meet basic needs, bribes filled the void. From time to time, the government staged show trials designed to scare small-time grafters. But the problem was that everybody, including the top officials, took bribes in one form or another. I described how it worked in my historical novel, The Prince of the Soviets. The state paid poorly. The danger was everywhere. The command economy promised everything: jobs, pensions, and universal health care, but it couldn't promise shoes in your size, or meat for Sunday dinner, or quality suture materials for your surgery. And so, out of that vacuum, blood was born. Blood was the unofficial economy of favors. A bottle of cognac here, a crisp envelope there. In return, a carport, a dental appointment, or a coveted spot in kindergarten. By the Brezhnev years, sociologists noted that knowing how to give a little bribe was as essential as knowing how to read. Without it, you could wait years for an apartment or a phone line. By that standard, my father was illiterate. He simply didn't know how to navigate the system. If you want to know more about blood, I have a separate video about it, and I think it's quite funny. It's a mistake to think that bribes, especially large ones, were easy to give. Officials did not just accept cash from anyone. They were cautious. A poorly timed or clumsy offer could be seen as a trap. Many insisted on intermediaries, recommendations, or elaborate rituals of trust before accepting anything significant. But in certain spheres, bribery was so normalized it became almost transactional. Hotels were one example. It was understood that slipping a few bills to the front desk could get you a room when the hotel was full, or allow you to bring in a companion who didn't exactly match the passport on file. The administrator didn't ask questions. They just reached for the key. Traffic violations worked the same way. Speeding, illegal turns, expired documents. None of it had to end in paperwork. A folded bill inside a license or a passport usually solved the issue on the spot. Drivers even joked about carrying a universal pass, a specific denomination always ready in the glove compartment, just in case. Even fashion had its price. In the swinging 60s, Soviet stiliagi paid bribes to keep their American-style pants from being cut by patrolmen. But higher up, the numbers got dizzying. In Central Asia, the Uzbek cotton mafia reported 1 million bales of phantom white gold. Investigators opened 800 cases, 4,000 people were convicted, 4 billion rubles disappeared. In Moscow, the Yeliseevsky supermarket affair engulfed 15,000 people. Store managers, trade officials, even Brezhnev's own daughter, Galina. Each case revealed the same structure. Every official schemed a little, passed some upward, and trusted their patron to protect them until the wind changed. The unwritten rule of late Soviet life was simple. To live well, you had to give well, and give correctly. A tin of caviar to the clinic director bought rare medicine for your child, but the wrong envelope to the wrong person. That could send you to a labor camp. When the Soviet Union collapsed, bribery didn't disappear, it became essential. The old ideology was gone, but the state and society kept the same underlying structure and habits. Courts were unreliable, laws were vague or unenforced, and survival often depended not on rights, but on knowing whom to pay. Legal protection didn't exist. If you had a problem, you solved it in one of three ways: by paying someone in government, paying someone with a gun, or more often, both. A bribe wasn't just a shortcut. In some cases, it was protection from prison, poverty, or death. Take the military draft. In Russia, it's mandatory. But in practice, conscripts come from the lowest social tiers. Rural towns, poor families, boys with no connections. A friend of mine from a small industrial city told me that in her school, almost every boy ended up in the army. In my circle, no one did. Why? Because in the 1990s, draft officers were flexible if you paid. In some cases, it meant not being sent to Chechnya. A well-timed envelope could save your life. From the very beginning of privatization, fair competition was a myth. Sure, there were stories of people trading a truckload of vodka for a factory, and those stories were true, but only if the right official gave you permission. And to get that permission, you needed cash. You also needed a loan for the vodka, which meant bribing a bank clerk to approve it. Every step in the chain, permission, paperwork, and delivery, was oiled by a payoff. Bribes flourished anywhere official inaction could cause damage. Customs was a classic example. A customs officer could either let your goods through or hold them indefinitely and slap a penalty that would cost you months in court to reverse. One company I spoke with said they factored in relationship costs in every border crossing. Judges were no better. Cases were often won not by evidence, but by envelopes. Even in prisons, bribes controlled everything: cell assignments, access to medicine, even early release hearing. Officials learned to write laws not to solve problems, but to create obstacles, then offer paid solutions. Fire safety codes, tax rules, building permits all became bargaining chips. Restaurant owners I know simply fed local inspectors for free every time they dropped by. It was easier than arguing over violations that only existed on paper. Government contracts worked the same way. If you share profits with the right official, you always won the tender. Construction firms learned to inflate their budgets because kickbacks were expected. The richer the contract, the bigger the cut. One Moscow company admitted that nearly 30% of every city-funded project went to administrative overhead, code for bribes. Public offices themselves became commodities. Want to be a judge? There's a price. Want to sit in the Duma? That too. Lobbyists even talk openly about the menu of fees for getting a law passed. Bribery evolved into a structured investment. You paid to enter the system, and once inside, you recouped the cost through favors, contracts, and influence. Before the war, even foreign businesses knew how to play the game. They didn't protest the system, they adapted. Want to open a new store? Pay the local inspector. Need a lease in a prime location? Someone will help you for a cut. Want a visa for your top specialist? You know what to do. One of the most bizarre stories I've heard is about Aeroflot pilots and flight attendants acting as unofficial couriers for Russia's private medical clinics. A man I know used to buy medicine and supplies here in the US and hand it off to a pilot. No tariffs, no inspections, just a quiet handover, and suddenly that clinic in Moscow had everything it needed. The customs declaration, not necessary when your courier wears a uniform and walks through the green corridor. Today, in wartime, bribery is alive and well. There are reports of draft evasion selling for thousands of dollars. Some pay to be declared unfit for service. Others bribe their way into less dangerous positions. The logic hasn't changed. In Russia, a bribe is not a breakdown of the system, it's the guarantee the system will function at all. And the higher the stakes, the higher the price. In Russia, a bribe isn't always an envelope stuffed with cash. It can take almost any form, as long as it gives the right person what they want, or what they can later resell for something even better. Sometimes it's access. Getting your child into university without exams, or securing permission to leave the country for medical treatment. Other times, it's objects of value, paintings, luxury cars, yachts, or entire palaces. Some bribes come in the form of people. Young women, models, escort girls, sometimes even Olympic athletes are quietly offered as gifts to powerful men. There are also financial bribes with long legs. The ability to launder money and move it abroad, or get it out of rubles and into a real estate in Dubai, villas in Italy, or anonymous accounts in Cyprus. There are supply chain bribes, like quietly imported banned items from the West. Ozempic, the diabetes drug turned weight loss craze, is officially restricted. Yet somehow it's everywhere in elite circles. Someone somewhere is bringing it in. And then there are gestures so large they become monuments to the system itself. Vladimir Putin's infamous palace in Gelendzhik was not gifted by one man. It was funded collectively, businessmen and oligarchs pooling their money to build a coastal fortress for a single person. Not because they were ordered to, because they knew how the game works. It was not charity, it was insurance. The system will not change under this regime. You can fix it with a few firing or new slogans. It requires rewriting the laws, replacing judges, and clearing out the bureaucracy on every level. Can bribery be defeated? Yes, but only if not taking bribes becomes more profitable than taking them. They are real-world examples, but this regime is not interested in reform. It's addicted to the status quo. Let's be honest. If someone offered the Kremlin a big enough bribe to stop the war, they might even consider it. But who would trust them to keep their word? They've already proven that in Russia, no matter how much you pay, the appetite never shrinks. If this video helped you look past the headlines, if it gave you the key to understanding the real Russia, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your engagement is what pushes these hidden stories beyond the reach of censorship and into the wider world. And if you are ready to explore Russia's forbidden truths through powerful stories the Kremlin doesn't want you to hear, check out my other channel, Elvira Bary Forbidden Books. You'll find novels, thrillers, historical fiction, stories of Russia that dares to think freely. Thank you for being here. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive.